Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets escape Atlanta with the nail-biting victory, holding on 108-107. We break down the late game sequences, the dominant performance from Kyrie Irving in that fourth quarter, and really the formula to the Brooklyn Nets now 10-game winning streak ways. Take it all down next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. Yes, my friends. This is Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I, of course, am Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. And over there, you will not find Doug Norrie, but he remains the owner and operator of DFSR for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. And we are going to take a look here at what was as exciting a victory as you could want from the Brooklyn Nets over the course of their winning streak. But inside of that, we also do realize that when it comes to significant winning streaks, when it comes to who's in the lineup or not in the lineup for the opposition, ultimately, it's just about finding a way to get across that finish line and get that victory. And in that vein, there is going to be a discussion here around Kevin Durant. His fingerprints were all over this game, got back in there in the fourth quarter, obviously. But I mentioned at the top about the winning formula that they've kind of put together here over this winning streak when it comes to their two superstars. And obviously, the second of those two being Kyrie Irving and the performance that he put on in the fourth quarter of this game. It was noted, by the way, if you're watching on the Yes Network broadcast in the postgame there as they got rolling, Kyrie Irving made a bit of a wardrobe change at halftime, switched out the sneakers, came out in the second half, and obviously put together a much better performance for himself. He went 6 of 10 in that fourth quarter for 15 points. We know he had those triples there early. The first 8 points of the fourth quarter were put together by Kyrie Irving, and that's after the Nets had found a way to get themselves back out to the lead there to close out the third, trailing at halftime in this one as well. So he comes on in a significant way. I mentioned 6 of 10, obviously. Overall, he's 11 of 22, 5 of 11 from beyond the arc, gives you 28-point performance in this one, dished out 8 assists as well. But really, this had some of those reminiscent vibes of that Cavs game too, because you look across and you see that DeJounte Murray is putting up, what do you end up finishing with? Just 24 points, 10 of 26. So not a great performance from him, obviously, from a shooting perspective. But in that fourth quarter, you're waiting to see, right, who's going to step up, who's going to make the big plays for them. And there certainly were contributors. And we're going to take a look at the ways in which this lineup, even without Trae Young and even without some of their other key contributors, can still be dangerous, whether you're a team looking for the 10th win in a row or you're the Atlanta Hawks kind of struggling to find their rhythm as they fall to 500 following this loss. But Kyrie Irving was fully in his bag, man. Early in this game, he put a man on skates on the cross-up, put him on his butt, knocked down the jumper. In that fourth quarter, as we said, comes out, knocking down those triples. Had 2 triples and a baseline runner. Heat check triple, by the way, from well beyond the arc. Also used a little bit of crossover work to free himself up amongst 2 tall defenders on that first triple that got the ball rolling for Brooklyn in that fourth quarter as well. Getting to the basket, you saw some of the wizardry. He worked a Euro step that was combined with kind of an over the head to sweep the ball beyond the defender and also get up at the basket. He took contact from DeJounte Murray in the lane while avoiding John Collins to hang, as we so often see with him, hang in the air and virtually levitate to get that ball to drop there, get to the line for the and one opportunity. This is always the reminder, not that we need it, that Kyrie Irving is obviously an electric offensive talent. And the one thing that we will discuss inside of this opening segment here is the formula that the Brooklyn Nets have been working with. And on the back end, we'll discuss one interesting Jacques Vaughn decision in the first half of this game when it comes to rotations. But this has been kind of the way that things have gone for Brooklyn since Kyrie came back from the suspension and everything has continued to keep rolling, right? Everyone's continued to look stronger. The team, the chemistry, the continuity, the winning. It's been about having balance on both ends of the floor to start games, trying to get yourself out to early leads. Atlanta certainly made that a difficult task in this one. Nets trailed for enormous chunks of this game. I think we ended up with 8 or 9 ties in this matchup throughout. But Kyrie Irving at the end of halves and at the end of, the start of third quarters has really been a catalyst for a lot of the success. We know against the Cavs, trailing, going towards the break, almost trailing, 44-43, big run, 3 triples from Kyrie. Same thing in this game. I think that the balance that they're starting to show here, which is when we need you to turn it on, and it goes for both Kevin Durant and Kyrie, but specifically with Kyrie, when we need you to turn it on, when Kevin Durant needs to be getting rest, you need to be able to take over games. And Kyrie Irving went out and showed that one in this. And you can go back and look at where we stood as we worked our way through this game. We'll talk about Kevin Durant overall performance coming up in a minute, but it required, when you look inside, TJ Warren and Yuta Watanabe combined for 6 points, combined for 3 of 11 from the field, right? We're going to touch on one Patrick Mills coming up here. But outside of Patty, you only got 8 points off the bench in this game. Starting unit did its job. Royce O'Neal, though, struggled 34 minutes, 3 of 6 overall from the field, going to highlight his successes on the defensive end for certain stretches in this one as well. But this was one of those games where it felt like it was going to require the Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving minutes to be really plus opportunities for Brooklyn. Seth Curry returned tonight. It did not matter. Just played 7 minutes in this one, getting his legs back underneath him. You look at this team, you think about the ways that they're always going to win. It's always going to start with these 2 superstars. But I think if Kyrie Irving can lean into, and obviously he can, but lean into this kind of role where it's about being a part of it and then striking. It's about being in the flow of the game and then punishing the defenses, because there are no one-on-one matchups that you can beat. There are no ways to throw a double team at him that he can't split or find the outlet pass. He is one of the smarter basketball IQ players in the league, and he showcased that. And most of it was just the offensive repertoire in this one. Good to note as well that obviously in the closing sequences of this, there was some clunkiness, because I don't want to gloss over top of that. Kyrie Irving himself, he misses the pass coming from Kevin Durant at midcourt, ends up committing the foul. They're over the limit. That leads to opportunities, easy free points at the line, although Murray misses one of those. So that kind of creates a little bit different of an ebb and flow for this game. But really, I think if you're going to put together a consistent, repeatable process, this is what you can lean into. And when Kyrie goes 6 of 10, you take that away from his performance. He was 5 of 12 leading up to that fourth quarter. And it wasn't a pretty 5 of 12. It wasn't a grinding it out 5 of 12. I actually thought he did some decent things on the defensive end as well. Only had 2 turnovers in this game. You don't see the steals. He did his best to stay in front of some of his assignments, DeJounte Murray, etc., sometimes on those switches as well. But he hasn't been nearly the poison pill on the defensive end this season that you would expect. He's leaned into that and shown a little bit of that grit and toughness. So coming up here in a second, we will, of course, talk about Kevin Durant, because if Kyrie Irving took over in the fourth quarter, Kevin Durant continues to show why he is the MVP candidate that he should be. And it was more than just his scoring and got the job done. The connectivity with Nicholas Claxton was a huge part of how this team was successful in the first 3 quarters, and how they were able to maybe hang in one where it looked like Atlanta came out with more energy despite being on a back-to-back, with more intent, with more pace, and all of those elements that can lead to a really tight game. But before we do, going to tell you about our friends over at Rocket Money, formerly known as Truebill, is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills all in one place. Over 80% of people who have subscriptions they forgot about, like that streaming service you bought. We talked about this before. I think for Doug, it might have been doubling up on a little Paramount Plus. For me, I'm running multiple Disney Pluses. I got family members. I have nephews and nieces, and I want them to be able to enjoy it. So why not spend twice as much money in a month? Rocket Money makes it easy canceling subscriptions. It says one click easy. That's how they like to do it for you. Simply find your subscriptions you don't want and press cancel, and Rocket Money will cancel it for you. No more long hold times with customer service or tedious emailing back and forth. Over 3 million people have used Rocket Money, saving the average of up to 170. 170, you wish. $720 a year. Stop throwing your money away, cancel unwanted subscriptions, and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/lockedonnba. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedonnba. rocketmoney.com/lockedonnba. All right, turning our attention back into this one then as well. Said this coming out of the Cavs game. Sometimes you try to get these notes down. You want to see the things that are working and functioning well for a team. And then that one just kind of breaks out and you swept up in it. Likewise with the Bucks game too. But early on, which all ties back into Kevin Durant's performance here, it's, these sequences that you see where Kevin Durant is getting into that mid-range space and then dropping it off. 3 out of 4 easy alley-oop kind of round the basket dunks that he set up went to one Nicholas Claxton. It really, again, was that repeatable process of set the table for teammates. They didn't have the same kind of, 4 through 8 support that they've gotten in previous games. But thankfully, in a game like this against Atlanta, the guys that mattered most, like a Nicholas Claxton, who came away with 17 points on 8 of 9, almost all of that work being done in and around the lane, including one Euro step where he took a little bit of a body from John Collins and still finished fading away from the rim, and 10 rebounds to boot. But so much of that was predicated on Kevin Durant, the attention that he was drawing, and the way in which it was easily setting things up for others. Kevin Durant goes just 17 shots in this game. Threw up this the other day. I'll mention it here. I might have said it in the post-game podcast after last game too. Over the last 3 months, Kevin Durant has increased his field goal percentage, has increased his three-point shooting, has reduced his minutes from 38 down to closer to 35 now, played 36 tonight, and is still, even though scoring 26 in tonight's game, maintained a 29-point average over those last 3 months when he was making 31, 32 in October. So you're lowering the workload, and then you're seeing the benefits of him being even more efficient. He continues that tonight. He gets to the line 9 times. We often talk about it's not going to be often that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving get to the line almost double digits because they're so good at avoiding contact. Kevin Durant specifically so good at rising above some of these defenders and getting those mid-range looks to go. But he gets to the line, doesn't miss there. 16 rebounds in this game. And in the postgame, he referenced teammates doing a good job boxing out and him just kind of being able to swoop in and grab some of those. Obviously, when we think about not having a Clint Capella out there for the Atlanta Hawks, that makes a big difference. But this is where we talk about that team mentality on the defensive end. Hey, when you have Simmons out there, when you have Claxton out there, even when you have the other spare parts, your job is to make it easier for the guards to grab some rebounds. And in those instances, when it's that 5-man lineup, those 2 players specifically need to make it easier for Kevin Durant to swoop in and grab those and then dish out 8 assists to go along with his 2 blocks in this game as well. That's why I said before, an all-around game where his fingerprints are just all over this, because the attention that he draws and then the opportunities that facilitates were just throughout those first 3 quarters. Now, you look back at it and you say the Brooklyn Nets are trailing by just 1 point coming out of that first quarter, but they end up losing that second quarter 33-25. So you find yourself, they won that first quarter by 1 point, and then lose by 8 in the second quarter. You're down 7 at the break. So again, you want to make sure that there is that balance, that you're not doing too little with Kevin Durant early on in the game. And it's always prettier when you're up big and you're able to kind of bury teams as you work your way into that second half. In this game specifically, though, unlike when we talked about the Cavs last matchup, the slowest paced team in the league, 7th paced team, fastest paced team in the league for the Atlanta Hawks. So again, even without Trae Young, even without some of their pieces, it's still it's the mentality of this team. So you saw this, a lot of transition game, a lot of easy looks, right? So Atlanta was going to push the pace all the way through here. And I think that's all that it really takes, is not having a team be down 7-10 early, which makes it possible to be in the game all the way throughout. And the big adjustment for me, though, and was interesting here, as we will touch on, is the way in which the rotations got worked to close out the first half in that second quarter with some Patty Mills and Seth Curry minutes that got mixed in there, and whether or not that could have really cost the Brooklyn Nets in this game. So Kevin Durant plays at a high level. That's awesome. But you're working your way through, and all of a sudden, you get these minutes where you have out there on the floor Mills and Curry without Kevin Durant, without Kyrie Irving, And you have Ben Simmons out there as well. You think it's Warren along with Yuta Watanabe. Now, here's the weird part about it, though, because in those minutes, at first, when the Nets get down by, I think, almost 15 points at one point, you're saying this is where you can effectively lose a game. And we talk about the formula for this team. It's been about finding ways to get Kevin Durant rest in the second and fourth quarters. And then he runs that whole first quarter typically. He runs that whole third quarter typically. You get 24 minutes there, and then you see how long can we push that rest. Came in at like the 6:30 something mark in the fourth quarter in this one. But when Jacque Vaughn was trying to buy rest, and he went to the Patty Mills, Seth Curry, I wish it was Steph Curry, Seth Curry backcourt lineup, it really opened up a potential massive risk to start to fall behind by 15, by 20 points. And someone mentioned in the comments the other day, and I thought it was worth bringing up, you don't want to ever overexert in one of these games. We've talked about how even though KD is playing, 38, 37, 36 minutes a night, they've been more balanced minutes. They haven't been these high leverage minutes where he's taking 24, 30, 24, 25 shots a game. No, he's taking 17 to 20, and he's being efficient in those numbers. This game was trending in the direction where you could have turned around and said, hey, we're about to run into a situation where Kevin Durant's going to have to come out. He's going to have to play the whole third quarter. He's maybe only going to get a couple minutes of rest in the fourth, and we're going to be looking at a 38, 40-minute point game, a 40-minute game from Kevin Durant in order to pull this one out. And you want to get this win because it's the back-to-back Atlanta, and they're a depleted roster. So you go through this sequence here in that second quarter. At one point, it is going to be, it's 41-33, and they extend that out 45-33. And this is when Jalen Johnson makes the 11-foot jumper, 11-foot driving floating jumper. He drove that lane there, split the defense. He had a couple of nice sequences in this game. It was right after that Patty Mills drilled a three-pointer, right back for Jalen Johnson again. Patty Mills with another triple, and then you work your way through as you end up seeing just fouls getting picked up by the Nets. Ben Simmons makes a little 10-footer, makes it 41-47, and you narrowly kind of escape this thing as you're working your way towards it. That's getting into the midway point of this second quarter, and I think it went maybe from down 7 at one point. It was as much as 15, but when they pulled them out, the balloon of it actually happened when Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving came back into the game. So you survived those minutes. But as we talk about Jacque Vaughn and saying, hey, he's pushed all the right buttons, things have mostly looked good for this team, there was a bit of a head scratcher here. And I made the note of it of saying, like, in game, a thought just about Patty Mills here, who we drag all the time, or at least we've established what he is at this point. Some people you look back and think about bringing him back on the 2-year extension, and that's pretty brutal. Patty Mills played 12 minutes in this game. He went 3 for 3. All of them were triples. He had 1 rebound, had 1 turnover. He was -8. By the way, everybody except for Durant, O'Neal, Claxton, and Irving were in the minus when it comes to that plus-minus ratio. Sumner in his beautiful 4 minutes. But there's a perfect example. Where was Edmund Sumner in this game is the first thing you're probably asking, right? In a matchup like this, Seth Curry, if the perimeter shot was going to be there when he checks back in, great. He only took 1 from the outside, 4 across the court here. But again, picked up 2 fouls in just 7 minutes. This was the brutal kind of switching matchup. Get Murray onto him, 6'5". Even Curry with his little more size playing up at the guard, pseudo up to the forward position there at times. It just was never going to be a good matchup for him. So I understand going away from it pretty quickly, but I was just shocked that this is the way in which you chose to buy those minutes. Bringing in Patty Mills onto himself is one thing, but doing it without Kevin Durant on the floor is certainly another. But again, it kind of worked out. So, maybe at the end of the day, we don't have to squint too hard to say you wanted to make sure you bought the rest for your stars. You needed their minutes later in this game. And if effectively you played pseudo neutral while they were off the court, you'll take that every single time. By the way, it was another couple footnotes from this game that I wanted to mention here, specifically, about what Atlanta was doing early in this one, how they were having successes. And one of the key stats that sometimes when they fall, it can determine whether or not this game becomes a blowout in favor of Atlanta and the Nets have to claw their way back, or you hang tough around it and find a way to manufacture a win, which is ultimately all that matters for the Nets. We'll continue to break this one down coming up here in a second, including the matchup difficulties that Atlanta certainly presents and why a full-strength Atlanta team might make for an exciting early round series, depending on if they can get their act fully together and get themselves in and through that play-in game. Before we do that, though, bring it down for a moment here on a serious note, as we do remind you that everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel under the influence. That's why police officers are out and right now looking for impaired drivers on the roads to save lives. It's plain and simple. If you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again, play it safe, and plan ahead to get a ride. It takes only one mistake to change your life or someone else's life forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. Okay. So it is ultimately the formula of Kevin Durant throughout, him orchestrating this offense in so many ways, him making big impact plays on the defensive end at times as well, and then that really explosive, dynamic, unique, one-of-a-kind offensive talent that is Kyrie Irving taking over for big stretches in this game. You can go back and check out, actually, Doug had a great episode up over there that got a lot of positive feedback on the YouTube channel, where he was specifically talking about Nicholas Claxton and the evolution of his game, what it's meant for the Brooklyn Nets. And he did a great job. I want to make sure that I get his name correctly here. Speaking with Matt. And let's go ahead and lock that up there for you. Speaking, we'll give you his full name there. I apologize. He did a great job talking about the value of Nicholas Claxton and where his value has increased to. And one of the things we didn't highlight here, even though we said 17 points for Nicholas Claxton, the thing we didn't say was that when you go inside the box score, he also came away with 6 blocks in this game. Like, his defensive presence has been nothing short of critical for this team's success. And when you go and look at a game like this that does lack a Clint Capella, which means what? That he's going to be able to stay on the court, Claxton, and not necessarily run into some foul issues throughout this game. He did a really great job, and especially in the second half, both he and the defensive unit collectively did a much stronger job than some of the early sequences, rotating over on help defense, rotating over on switches, closing out a little bit better on those perimeter looks as well. But that full stat line, when you go look at Claxton, 6 blocks, 10 rebounds to go along with the 17 points. The double-double is there for him. I think it does, 17 points is fantastic. I'll always love the rebounds and the blocks, because that means he's being an impact player on both ends of the floor. He got to the line in this game just 2 times, knocked down 1 of 2, also drew a lane violation again. So teams still adjusting to that style of play there. We lump him in with Ben Simmons, 5 of 10 from the field, 10 points in this game, 5 rebounds, 2 assists. I'm not going to call it one of his better performances. I thought that early in this game, there were a couple of sequences. He showed probably the best burst that he has seen all season, getting downhill and attacking towards the basket. Couldn't get it to fall. But again, we talked about this in previous episodes, 25 minutes for him. You're going to pull him off for some key sequences to avoid some of those foul issues and getting at the line concerns. But by and large, he continues to be able to do those things on the defensive end that alleviates some of the strain on a Kevin Durant, on a Kyrie Irving, just from a defensive value standpoint. And in a game like this too, 26 minutes for TJ Warren, not effective, 1 of 5 from the field, just 2 points. He did show a little bit of gumption on the defensive end here. But ultimately, when he's on the floor, you need Ben Simmons, you need Nicholas Claxton to be able to alleviate that pressure on the defensive end and typically set them up for success on the other end of the floor. But early in this game, to go back to my notes on it, there was a 13-5 run to close out the half, down 7 when Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving came back in. So I want to make sure that I clarified that. It ballooned up a little bit when the Stars came back in, and then they ultimately got it down to that 13-5 run and down to a 7-point deficit. Atlanta was 6 of 11 from beyond the arc. And I thought that when you looked at DeJounte Murray, 11 points, 6 assists. But here's the perfect example, as we've talked about before. What do the Nets maybe need to add? It's a defensive POA defender in the backcourt that can try to take on some of this burden of defending against players like Murray. because when you look at this overall, Murray ends up, again, he doesn't have a great performance, but the access to the lane was there with consistency. I thought that you saw kind of on the outside the beneficiaries of it. Bogdanovich, 3 of 4 from beyond the arc. Holiday, a couple of there as well. But this is what was interesting about it. 6 of 11 in the first half, and you think, hey, that's a dangerous trend that could end up creating a real issue for the Nets. Guess what? 8 of 22 from beyond the arc and only 22 attempts, by the way. I mean, that is well below league average. I think it's something like 35, 36 from beyond the arc attempts per game. And in a game like this, you would think that you would try to lean into that part of it and maybe get a little bit more Bogdanovich, although he played 29 minutes. Certainly it was there for him. Ultimately, Murray, 1 of 4 from beyond the arc, 0 of 3 for Griffin in this one, 1 of 3 for John Collins, who hit one early and ended up finishing 50% from the field and 21 points. But everything about this game started with the pace of play and the transition mentality from Atlanta, and the Nets having to deal with that and then make their adjustments and then start to stymie the Atlanta Hawks offensively, start to frustrate a John Collins, who still had a good game, but in key moments came up short because Claxton was doing his job, because Royce O'Neal on Bogdanovich late in the fourth quarter kept himself in front of him with consistency. Bogdanovich got lane access a couple of times in this one, got himself some easy looks. Royce O'Neal in a big way stepped up late. The defensive intensity stepped up late in this one. And I think by and large, if I was going to tie a bow on this game, it's that you come in and you look at who Atlanta doesn't have and you say, hey, they're coming off a back-to-back. No Trae Young, no Hunter, no Capella. It's in the bag, baby. They'll tire out in the fourth quarter. They didn't. Now you can make the, and by the way, a little bit of a bailout because DeJounte Murray hoists up a three, like settles for a three-pointer when you're only down 1 point. Maybe could have put more pressure on the defense. Maybe could have drawn a foul. Maybe could have gotten to the line, right? Who knows what could have happened in that closing sequence. And it's why you highlight the positives of Kyrie Irving and how he takes over in the second half of this game, specifically the fourth quarter. You highlight how Kevin Durant is playing MVP basketball and directly impacts and creates such easy and beneficial matchups for his teammates. The defensive value of Nicholas Claxton. You highlight all those things, and then you say, turn the page, move on to the next game, because there are a lot of things inside of this one that could have gone the other way, where the Nets could have faded. They shouldn't have. It shouldn't have been this close, but they could have faded. Instead, they end up winning their 10th straight here, now 14 out of their last 15 games. And the one last note that I thought might come into effect here is that the Brooklyn Nets were 12-0 and still remain 12-0 in games when they shoot 40% from beyond the arc. Now, they finished 10 of 26, just 38.5% from there. So they ended up not playing a factor. But as you're playing a tight game like this, you try to lean into some of those stats and say, hey, by the numbers, if they can just make 2 more three-pointers here, there's no way they could lose the game. 108-107 is the ultimate victory. They beat and win that third quarter 27-17. That's the key quarter here. They lose the fourth quarter by 2 points. So it really just came down to balancing the books. You got beat up in that second quarter. You came out, you reset the tone, got yourself back together. And just to highlight the way it started out there, the Nets erased that fourth quarter and ended up 83-80 with improved rotations, better cover on defense, and then you allow Kyrie Irving to come out firing in the fourth. This is a repeatable process for the Brooklyn Nets. This is a game plan that they should be able to have consistently night in, night out. And despite going up against the depleted roster in Atlanta, when you don't have necessarily that supporting, rotating cast that we've talked so much about, you got to find a way to have your best players have their best games. And that's at the top. Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Nicholas Claxton right in there in that mix as well. And then you hope for a nice little pop-up performance from one Patty Mills. Some of them we'll maybe talk about a little bit more here. Little show note before we close out. Not sure if we're going to do a Friday episode or not. If we do, I'm looking at something a little bit more expansive, talking about where this offseason could have gone and whether or not some other teams around the league are kind of having a little bit of a lack of buyer's remorse around one Kevin Durant because they did not go all in for an MVP candidate like KD. That would be what we'll talk about. Let's call it a tentative tease. Maybe check in with us on Friday, see if it's up there and in action. Otherwise, we'll be back in on Monday. Doug will be covering the game over the weekend, so you can catch him doing the post game live, and then that'll be on the Monday podcast feed. So as we always tell you, get over to YouTube, get into the conversation. Over 200 people in here on the live post game feed. We love it. We appreciate it. We continue to want to see you out here early and often. Get that podcast feed, leave a glowing review, all that great stuff. And without my co-host Doug Norrie here, you know the deal. There is no quote short of simply saying, I miss my friend, and I can't wait until he gets back here so we can keep talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball. All right, it's the podcast live on YouTube, obviously. Appreciate everybody getting in on the conversation. I'm assuming I know where a lot of this is going to go. We always tell you, at Locked On Nets, if you have a question, a comment, whatever you want to discuss. I think, again, it's all right for a game like this just to be, you won it. Now let's move on from it, right? We need not dissect it. When you are on a winning streak like the Nets are, when you're winning 13 and 14 out of 15 games, it really just comes down to checking the box of getting the win. And going in, if not for that halftime, that pre-halftime surge there from Brooklyn, I think you could have seen this team come out a little bit flat. And I started to acknowledge it, and I'll talk about it here. I see Brody talking about Kyrie should have caught that pass. Sure, yeah, but who cares? They won the game, right? But again, if they had lost the game, we would talk about that sequence, right? We would talk about Kyrie Irving trying to find Royce O'Neal when Royce O'Neal doesn't drift to the corner, instead stays where he is, and he throws that one to the Nets bench, right? We would talk about the Nets coming out flat and the pace of play from Atlanta and the way they were getting easy access to the lane. All of these things were going to be what we would discuss if they had lost the game. Instead, you win it, and we don't have to necessarily look at those Seth Curry, Patty Mills minutes more critically from a Jacques Vaughn perspective because, again, they end up winning the game. Oh, what up, Clash? You still going after Caruso or another backup point guard if we end up trading Seth? Yeah, I mean, again, I think that this is a good example. I said it in the show. Murray didn't have a great shooting performance, but those are the areas, right? The backcourt players that can get downhill, that it can attack in the lane, that can create space for themselves, that you can create mismatches and get switches and get onto plus matchups. If it's me, yes, that's still what I'm looking for here. I still think that is again, you want to have a backup center. You want to have someone to spell some minutes for Claxton. We're on board with that. We've never been on board with, and don't remain on board with, taking the big swing and going for some high profile players that are going to cost you big capital, going to cost you maybe a Nicholas Claxton. It's like, that's going to be what teams ask for. And there's just no world where you're sacrificing that. So yeah, I think I still look at that as being someone that I want to go after. It could be Caruso. We know he had the injury. I'm going to come up with a list over the next couple of weeks as we look towards that deadline in February of, hey, here's my short list of 5 defensive-minded guards with size. And then honestly, in a game like this too, remember, I think one of the big reasons that Curry had such limited time on the court was because you couldn't rely on his ball handling. And it's really something I should have discussed with a little more in depth there. Why Patty Mills, right? Is he a pure point guard? No, he's really not, right? He doesn't have the ball handling skills. But when you go back in and you look inside the numbers, most importantly, it was the scoring. And he only ended up giving you what? One rebound to go along with it. It was just the scoring that mattered here. But the ball movement was good, right? Now, has Edmund Sumner shown enough that maybe he was deserving of just coming right in there? Yeah. But then you catch his sample size and it does not look good at all. So there is kind of this little ebb and flow where you would assume you're going to lean towards players that have been in that rotation. But I think that Jacques Vaughn has done a nice job of kind of picking his spots and saying, hey, at some point, I need to get Warren a little bit of rest. He looked a little bit like it's caught up with him after some really great performances. He's going to need a little bit of a spell here. So is Edmund Sumner, again, coming off of an injury, right? So you're trying to rotate and keep everybody involved. And I mentioned Patty Mills, and just to round out Clash, yes, I would still do that when it comes to just, bringing in a guard play. But I will just say, like, Patty Mills played tonight, gave you 12 points. He played against the Cavs. He gave you 6 minutes. He gave you nothing, from the field, right? Go back to the Golden State Warriors game, 5 of 5 from the field, 3 of 3, 13 minutes. Gave you a ton of minutes going back. The last time you saw the court before these past 3 games, the 10th, the Pacers, the backups, 136, 133, 34 minutes, 10 of 20. Like, it's just worth noting that with everything they asked of him last year, and Doug went to bat for this time and time again around the idea of, hey, everyone keeps saying that, he's cooked and he's fallen off a cliff here. His numbers usually come back to the mean, and you were asking significantly more of him than you should have. And I'm not telling you that Patty Mills is a key cog to what they want to accomplish here. But what I will tell you is that I think Jacque Vaughn and the Nets have done a really smart thing of taking all the workload off of his plate and then understanding, like, he's a spot guy that can give you some quality minutes, right? He's the kind of guy that can catch fire for you. And if you have a young player like Cam Thomas, who's different and more dynamic and has all the upside in the world, etc., but if you don't always think that you can rely on him, Patty Mills is a nice little, hey, every third or fourth game, I may need you for 6 or 7 minutes. I may have this player down. I may want to spell somebody. We may have an injury. That's what I think they're trying to carve him into. You combine that with, obviously, the locker room value, the veteran presence. That game, tonight's game, hey, man, that's critical. Those 12 points, kind of a big deal in this one. Without those, I don't know who steps up outside of the main players to help them get over the hump against Atlanta. Jamal, do you think it was a problem that any lineups without KD and Kyrie are always getting killed on both sides of the ball? Yeah, I mean, we talked about it. I think so. When TJ Warren is playing well, it looks different, right? When Harris is in there, it looks different. The more perimeter shooting keeps the floor spacing a little bit better. Do I think that it's bad that they get killed? No, because name any team that has superstar players on it. And if you took, give me a team that has two talents like KD and Kyrie and take them off the court and tell me that they're still going to be sustaining and winning games. By and large, and we've talked about this going back to last year, when you put together a roster or when you build an organization up to attract superstars, what ends up happening is, your rotations suffer. Now, I still think that this team and this roster is as deep as it's ever been, and they have some of the best redundancies at their positions that they've ever had. I think that you're still trying to find out if you needed to, if Kyrie's going to miss a game, if Kevin Durant needs a game off, right? If you take them both out of it, like that Pacers game, you want to go back to that one, right? If you take them out of the lineup and you say, can you still go and produce, finding that unit cohesion when you have a Ben Simmons and Nicholas Claxton who have tremendous benefit and upside, but also need to function with high-level offensive players to really maximize their game, then you're talking about, can Yuta Watanabe, Royce O'Neal, TJ Warren, Edmund Sumner, can they help elevate and take over on the offensive end? And this was a game, by the way, I highlighted quickly here before we move into some other comments. I highlighted some of the other players in tonight's game, including, was I looking at Royce O'Neal. When you look at Royce O'Neal's game, who's been electric the last handful, right? You've been feeling so good about him. Here in this one, 3 of 6 from the field, just 1 of 4 from beyond the arc in 35 minutes. So this is the delicate balance. And by the way, this is also the reason why it had 3 blocks in this game. The defensive value was there for him, and they're late in key moments. But if you go back and you think about the games that he's had in recent memory, where he's knocking down some of those triples, and it looks really good, and you're happy with that performance, it's not the one-to-one of, and this is why you don't need Joe Harris, or why TJ Warren doesn't have to continue to get healthy and continue to be a consistent offensive weapon. Because Royce O'Neal can do that, but that's not going to be his primary function, right? You have certain players that their primary function is being perimeter shooters and helping to pile on points. You have certain players that are going to show up on the defensive end and then be good floor spacers, consistent players offensively. You have a guy like Yuta Watanabe. His role is to be a bit of a scramble defender on the defensive end because he can close out effectively without fouling. He has enough length to step in on key matchups and then set up in that corner and knock down those triples, right? Look, everybody has their niche, and you never want to get over your skis on any one player that's having a step-up stretch of games that is unique from what their overall role is. Because more often than not, they're going to come back to what they truly are. And that's not a negative. It's just that's what you need to rely on them for. And you can't start to change, I think, that expectation around them. And that's, by the way, why TJ Warren is so important. Because he is a scorer. He is a guy that can put the ball in his hands and he can go out there and have success for you. I think it's still about getting him fully ramped up, where playing 20, 25 minutes a night with consistency is something that isn't going to show a fatigue in games 3, 4, 5, as opposed to saying, hey, we got to give you night on, night off. I think they'd like to see him pushing that way. It's a matter of if he can solidify himself in that role. Did I miss one here? Feels like the Patty, Seth, Ben lineup would work better if we replace Patty or Seth with Joe. Yeah, and that's a good example of who's available or not, right? You want to put the ball in Patty's hands. I actually think, like, if we're talking about having Patty on the floor, you want to put the ball in Patty's hands, and then it's Joe Harris. I like it better because you just maintain the size, right? So if you think about a lineup like that, let's put Patty and Joe Harris in the backcourt, and then let's have Ben Simmons, let's have Watanabe, let's have Claxton. Or you want to make it Royce playing at the 3, right? You can do a lot of different things there. But you can give me 3 other players that have good size, good length, good functionality. At least give me one more shooter, one more offensive player, and then Joe Harris is playing down. So now on the defensive end, unlike with Patty and Seth, where it's a nightmare scenario and every matchup is a great matchup for the other team, now Joe Harris has the size to stay in front of a few people, still going to get beat up sometimes, but then you're talking about adding in at least 2+ defenders in behind them, maybe even a third if you're talking about putting Royce O'Neal into that rotation too. So yeah, 100%. Like I think, again, when you don't, and this is why you don't have one player, all of a sudden it gets a little bit funky. The other difference would be whether or not you'd say, hey, should it have been Sumner there instead of Seth, or instead, again, I go back to, it makes sense, I think, instead of Seth, because Patty is already undersized enough as it is. But if someone brought this up the other day about Sumner, he should be the guy that gets more minutes. I like Sumner. I like where he's headed. He hasn't been a consistent enough perimeter shooter. And then the one thing I do want to watch for, along with TJ Warren, is where's their defensive value been of late? How do they stack up in those matchups? How do they work on switching defenses? How do they work on one-on-one assignments? Because again, it's just like with Joe. He just needs to be functional on that end of the floor. As long as you're doing that, then the team overall can have success, right? So that's, I think, a big part of keeping everybody healthy, so you can continue to tweak those lineups as you work from a matchup to matchup standpoint. No, and Ben and Clax need an hour a day at the free throw line. Yeah, I mean, that's from DJ Cold Quest, and the follow-up coming in here from Ben doesn't need to score a lot of points. It's like a both and, right? Claxton's already reworked that shot. I know that he only went 1 of 2 from the line in this game. But when you go back in and you look at his game logs, overall, he's not getting there a ton. But in the month of December, hasn't been good enough yet. He has one. He had the 2 big clunkers early in the month against Boston and against Charlotte. But if you go back starting on the 16th, which if you want to cherry pick, right? But 5 of 8 against Toronto, 2 of 2 against Golden State, 1 of 2 Milwaukee, 1 of 2 against Atlanta. On the one hand, yes, here's what they need to be. They need to be reliable enough that you stay away from fouling them, right? That doesn't become an automatic. That's fine. The other part of it is, and I don't disagree with Hollow Beats, that, that Ben does not want to get fouled. He does not want to end up on the line where that risk comes in. Again, if you're playing high enough level basketball and the rotations are there and the spacing is there and the scoring is there collectively, then it's okay. There are times, right? There are times when it could rear its head, and playoff basketball is going to look different. But right now, if Ben's giving me 10 points a night, I'm perfectly content with that, because it means he's probably giving me 10 rebounds, maybe a little bit more. He's probably giving me 7 to 10 assists a game, right? He's going to be rating those margins of a double-double and sometimes triple-double. And then again, give me a couple of blocks, give me a couple of steals. It's the total value that you're looking at with Ben. Somebody asked me today about, where's the state of Ben Simmons' game, right? And I think it's still getting there. It's still evolving. This isn't the version that we hoped on. Maybe he hasn't been remotely close to what we want on the offensive end. The finishing around the rim is still off, but I'll take what it is right now, because total game value from him, it's like the way Kevin Durant, right? We say, hey man, 17 shots is more than enough. 26 points is more than enough, because you're doing everything else. You're setting up teammates. They're knocking down shots. You're having high assist numbers, and the team is winning basketball games. you would start to say, why isn't Kevin Durant taking 25 to 30 shots a game if the Nets were losing games? So it's always going to come back to, are they winning? I thought I saw a question in here. What we get? Another one from Clash. Do we extend Claxton, and what contract do you see is fair for him? Yeah, I mean, they signed him back on the 2-year, so he's in through next season. I think some of that can just be the function of like when the money, when and where the money, right? There is still the thing hanging over the franchise's head right now. When it comes to Kyrie Irving, we know that he's playing out the opt-in year. The more that this team performs well, the more that they win games, the more that they're a top 3 seed, and the more that they advance in the playoffs, probably makes it more likely that this whole band especially the Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving band stays together. So I'll be curious to see what it'll look like on that. I mean, I'd have to go look like, and John Collins isn't a comp in terms of functionality type of player or anything like that. But John Collins is on his contract, which he could opt out of, I think, after next season. And he's making like 20 to 25 million. I mean, again, like that's what it's going to dictate. He's a starting center in the NBA, and he's one of the most versatile switching defenders in the NBA too. So he's gonna command money. And the Brooklyn, he's 23 years old. The ceiling for him is still fully not realized at this point. What we are seeing is that he can continue to get better and grow. He can continue to put on mass season over season. You can come back next year and see a guy that has another 7 pounds of muscle mass on him. Come back and see a guy that is continuing to refine that little around the basket shot that he's already started to develop this season. You can come back and see a guy that's knocking down 60, 65% of his free throws and is becoming a more dangerous and consistent offensive threat. So the evolution of his game, I think if you're the Nets, you maybe hedged a little bit on bringing him back on the 2-year deal because the market wasn't there for him, but you had so many other financial pieces underneath your umbrella. Remember, it's like Spencer Dinwiddie days, should have brought him back, this player, that player. Every dollar that they spend ends up compounding on the luxury tax. So you probably hedge your bets a little bit, shuffle some money, and then he'll get his. Like I there's no world where at least I would be disgusted if he's not back with Brooklyn, if it's not on a long-term deal, and if the Nets aren't looking at Nicholas Claxton as being a guy during the Kevin Durant era that is a high-level player. And then if you're doing it right and you're preparing for the future, when that time comes, you'll have other players that help function around him and help create value for Nicholas Claxton as he goes forward in his career. So, I mean, we know nothing but praise for him. Yeah. And I think, again, 10 pounds shows enough, but 100%. Like a little bit more muscle on him means he can work through the contact and finish at the rim. So it's and ones as opposed to 2 free throws, which is always a little bit better. And then on the defensive end, just hold up a little bit more, have that weight behind you. But right now he functions on athleticism and basketball IQ against some bigger matchups defensively. Little more bulk just means you're going to be able to lean in there and stay in front of him. But I will say too, remember, like his versatility, his switchability, that functionality on the defensive end, it's a delicate balance because you got to stay lean and athletic to be able to stay with some of those guys and not maybe get bogged down a little bit as you start to put on a little bit more mass. All good things to talk about though over the next 5-6 seasons of his career. We are the 2 seed. That's right. Well, huzzah! Oh, that's good. Yeah, when I'm doing this, I don't get to keep an eye on the games. What do we got here? The Bucks lost to Chicago of all teams, man. Tell you what, the Bucks falling on a little bit of hard times. So if we go over, let's close out on this and then we'll get out the door. The Brooklyn Nets are officially in that 2 seed, half game ahead of the Milwaukee Bucks, 2 games back of the Boston Celtics, 12-5 at home, 11-7 on the road, currently on a 10-game winning streak, 18-6 in the conference, which, by the way, that is probably the best in the conference right now, 18-6 in the East. Boston is 15-8, 11-8 for the Milwaukee Bucks, 15-7 for the Cleveland Cavaliers when we just look at some of the top teams in the Eastern Conference right now. Remember, they had some easy games. They had some light schedules. That would have mattered more if they weren't checking the boxes when we get into the, we get into some of these more difficult ones. If you're not beating the Bucks, if you're not beating the Cavs, if you're not beating Atlanta, then it kind of waters down those soft schedule victories. Now it doesn't matter anymore. So how about that? That's how you cap off an evening where the Brooklyn Nets win their 10th straight, moving into the 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. When you take a step back and think about that, the Brooklyn Nets are 23-12, and they started out the season going 1-6, 2-7. So if you take away those 9 games, 2-7 to start the season, this is still going to be a team that has won 21 games and only lost 5. 21-5 after starting the season 2-7. Maybe it's even more impressive if you say 22-6. But that's how good they've been playing. So it's even beyond the 10-game winning streak now. It's about the totality of how they've turned things around. We said this before, and we continue to say it time and time again because it is worth repeating. Jacques Vaughn has just done it. He's done things the right way. When he stepped back into this role, he had direct and real convictions around it. And now you start to think about, when we look back just briefly at the standings, now when you talk about it, 23-12, second in the Eastern Conference, and we know that 22-12 team, 23-12, the 22-12 Pelicans are looming just around the corner. That is going to be maybe one of the more exciting matchups as we hit the mid-season point, not just for the Nets and maybe not just for the Pelicans, but when we talk about for the NBA, right? Pelicans have had an absolutely great start to their season. They're dominating out in the Western Conference. Things are looking very good for them. And we know when we go back early in the season, 130-108, the season started with a disgusting, demoralizing, embarrassing loss against those New Orleans Pelicans. They are just 3 games away from that, going on the road for Charlotte on Saturday to close out the 2022 annual calendar. And then San Antonio at home, Chicago on the road, New Orleans on the road, sandwiched in between Chicago and Miami. So the table is set, my friends. The table is set. We are going to keep breaking this thing down, as you know. As I said, Doug will be in Saturday night. Don't hold me to it as far as if he'll be doing the post-game live. I believe that he will, so you can get the post-game reaction on that one. And then we'll be back in next week, obviously doing the damn thing again and again. So that being the case, we, as always, appreciate everyone that comes into our lives, the post-game lives. This was the nail biter that we never thought we would be signing up for. But as long as it ends in a win, that's all that matters. Kyrie Irving leads the way with 28 points in this one. He and Kevin Durant had 32 points apiece in the previous game. So you're starting to see, trying to get some of that balance back into this offensive unit, making sure you keep some of that stress off of one Kevin Durant on a game-to-game basis. We'll also keep an eye on Joe Harris, the knee, see how serious that's going to be. A couple of games missed now, see how it ends up panning out. I'm starting to fade here. That means it's time to wrap. Thanks, K-Dub. Really appreciate that. Again, we appreciate when everybody shows up for these. When you guys are having, hopefully, great conversations amongst yourselves in the chat, throwing out some questions, and then we get to be a part of it too. So appreciate everybody on YouTube, on the podcast feed. We will see you again, as always, talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball.